The scent of old paper and polished mahogany usually calmed me, a familiar balm in the frantic symphony of an auction house backroom before a record sale. I knelt beside a carefully crated sarcophagus lid, its hieroglyphs still sharp despite millennia of shifting sands, tracing a hawk-headed deity with a gloved finger. The air thrummed with the hushed urgency of handlers moving priceless antiquities. The faint clink of protective padding, the murmured negotiations of collectors. My role here was one of authentication, a final forensic check for provenance and integrity before a piece entered the public domain. It was a world of meticulous detail, where a single misplaced chisel mark or an anachronistic pigment could unravel fortunes. My comm unit vibrated, a persistent buzz against my hip. I ignored it, absorbed in the subtle variations in carving technique that whispered secrets of workshops long turned to dust. It vibrated again, more insistently this time. The lead auctioneer, a woman with a hawk-like gaze and an encyclopedic knowledge of market value, cleared her throat from across the room. He knew my rules. No interruptions unless the building was on fire or a major archaeological discovery had just been unearthed. "Seth," he said, his voice a low warning. "That's the chief inspector." I sighed, rising slowly. The sarcophagus lid seemed to watch me, its ancient eyes holding patient judgment. Pulling off my gloves, I answered the call. "Dr. the Detective Finch is dead," the chief inspector's voice crackled, devoid of preamble. "Blackwood Manor appears to be a fall." My internal clock, usually so precise, seemed to stutter. The Detective Finch, the celebrated historian, the academic whose treatises on forgotten empires were both revered and feared. He was a living archive, a man who breathed history. And Blackwood Manor, a sprawling, isolated estate known for its labyrinthine grounds and a documented lineage stretching back to the early colonies. A fall, they said. My gut tightened. Finch was notoriously cautious, almost obsessive about his personal safety, especially around his precious collections. "They've secured the scene," the chief inspector continued, his tone clipped. "Local authorities are calling it accidental, but given Finch's standing and your particular skill set, I thought it best to have a second look, just to be sure." "Understood," I said, already picturing the scene, the variables, the endless possibilities. "I'll be there as soon as possible." The drive to Blackwood Manor was a journey into a different kind of time. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a narrow, overgrown track winding through ancient, gnarled oaks. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sunlight, when it pierced the canopy, fell in dappled patches, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stillness. The estate gate, a wrought iron behemoth draped in ivy, stood ajar, a silent invitation to a place that had seen centuries pass. Blackwood Manor itself rose from the gloom like a sleeping leviathan, a Gothic revival edifice of dark stone and towering chimneys, its windows like vacant eyes staring out over the desolate grounds. A single, uniformed cruiser was parked haphazardly near the front entrance, its blue lights extinguished. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the gravel. A junior officer, young and visibly uncomfortable, met me at the main door. He gestured vaguely towards the rear of the house. "The detective is in the garden, sir, with the deceased." The garden turned out to be less a manicured space and more a wild, overgrown expanse of ancient rose bushes and thorny thickets, sloping sharply down to a murky, stagnant pond. The chief inspector, a man whose face was a roadmap of perpetual skepticism, stood over a canvas sheet laid on the ground. A single forensic photographer circled, his camera clicking softly, mechanically. "Seth," the chief inspector greeted, his gaze sweeping over me. "Thanks for coming." He waved a hand toward the covered form. "Finch. He was found him this morning by a groundskeeper. Fell from the terrace, they think. About 20 feet up." I nodded, my eyes already dissecting the scene. The terrace, a crumbling stone balustrade, indeed overlooked this particular stretch of wilderness. It looked precarious, but not catastrophically so. My gaze dropped to the ground. There was a faint metallic tang in the air that wasn't just blood. "Any witnesses?" I asked, pulling on fresh gloves. "None." The groundskeeper found him around dawn, called it in immediately. The chief inspector's voice held a note of weary finality. "Looks like a simple, tragic accident. Old man, bad footing, a moment's inattention." I didn't reply, already moving towards the remains. My first principle: trust no initial assessment. Every scene held its own truth, waiting to be coaxed out by careful observation. The sheet was peeled back, revealing Doctor. His body lay twisted, an unnatural angle to his neck, his limbs splayed. He wore tweed trousers and a thick wool sweater, sensible attire for a cool morning, though one sleeve of the sweater was inexplicably torn at the elbow, a clean rip that didn't quite align with the overall pattern of impact trauma. I knelt, my eyes scanning for the minute. The chief inspector watched, arms crossed, his patience visibly fraying. The ground immediately beneath Finch's left hand, which lay palm up, was slightly disturbed. Not by a struggle, but as if something had been clutched, then dropped. I leaned closer, my nose almost brushing the damp earth. There was a faint, earthy aroma here, distinct from the surrounding soil. A hint of petrichor, but with an underlying sharpness, like dry clay. And then I saw it. Wedged between the fingers of Finch's left hand, barely visible, was a minuscule shard. It wasn't stone, or glass, or modern ceramic. I recognized the texture immediately, the way a sommelier recognizes a vintage. Obsidian. But not just any obsidian. This was a specific type, known to come from very particular geological formations, often associated with prehistoric tool-making sites in the eastern Mediterranean. My breath hitched. Finch, the esteemed historian of ancient civilizations, found dead at the foot of his manor, clutching a fragment of obsidian that had no business being here, not in this damp English soil, not in the hand of a man who supposedly just tripped. My gaze lifted to the crumbling balustrade, no longer seeing a mere 20-foot drop, but a precipice into something far older, far more dangerous. The record sale at the auction house seemed a million miles away, a distant, trivial hum. My own internal alarm bells began to clang. This was no accident. This was a carefully staged tableau, and the Detective Finch was just the first piece. He lay twisted, an unnatural angle to his neck, his limbs splayed like a discarded marionette. The sheet, now pulled back by the responding officer, revealed the historian's face, pale and still, eyes wide and fixed on the vaulted ceiling of the manor's great hall. A thin, dark trickle had dried at the corner of his mouth. My initial assessment, made from a distance, had been a fall, just as the local authorities had concluded. But my first principle, honed over decades, was an unyielding skepticism. I knelt beside the body, the heavy silence of the hall pressing in, broken only by the distant murmur of the investigative team securing the perimeter. I pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, the material snapping tight against my skin, a ritual that always brought my focus into razor-sharp clarity. My eyes scanned the immediate environment first. The polished flagstones beneath him were unmarred, no deep gouges or significant scuff marks that would indicate a violent struggle or a prolonged tumble down the grand staircase that loomed nearby. A few scattered papers, annotated maps, and what looked like fragments of ancient pottery lay haphazardly around, as if dropped in haste. The historian had been a collector, a scholar of antiquity. This was his domain, cluttered with the relics of forgotten eras. Then, to the body itself. I started with the visible injuries. The neck was clearly broken, a catastrophic injury consistent with a severe impact. His right arm was bent at an awkward angle, the forearm visibly deformed. But as I leaned closer, my magnifying loupe pressed to my eye, I began to see beyond the obvious. Along the historian's left temple, beneath a thin sheen of dried blood, I detected a faint, almost imperceptible bruising. It wasn't the kind of widespread contusion you'd expect from a heavy impact against a hard surface during a fall. Instead, it was localized, almost too neat. I moved my gaze to his hands, calloused and stained with the telltale ochre of ancient soil. His fingernails were clean, clipped short, no defensive wounds visible. But on the back of his left hand, just above the knuckles, I found another anomaly. A cluster of minute abrasions, a pattern inconsistent with scraping against the rough stone of the staircase. It was more like a series of shallow, parallel lines, as if brushed by something rigid, but not sharp. With methodical precision, I began a closer examination of his clothing. He was dressed in a tweed jacket, elbow patches worn smooth, and a heavy wool waistcoat. I used my forensic tweezers to collect fibers, hair, and any particulate matter clinging to the fabric. My gaze lingered on the waistcoat, particularly the front panels. Under the magnification, I saw them. Microscopic bone fractures. They weren't the large, splintered breaks visible to the naked eye, but hairline cracks, spiderwebbing across the bone structure of the historian's ribs and sternum. These tiny fractures, almost invisible, told a different story. They were consistent with a crushing force, not a sudden singular impact from a fall. A fall would produce more generalized trauma, perhaps a single large fracture. These suggested repeated smaller applications of force, or perhaps a complex compression. My mind immediately began to reevaluate the trajectory, the physics of a body falling. These fractures simply didn't fit. They spoke of pressure, of a sustained, directed force. My suspicion solidified. This wasn't a tragic accident. As I continued my sweep, moving down the waistcoat and onto the trousers, my loupe caught something else. It was barely visible, a shimmering residue that caught the ambient light. I carefully collected a sample onto a sterile slide, sealing it. This wasn't the ubiquitous dust of an old manor. This was something specific, something alien to this environment. My mind raced, cycling through known mineral compositions, geological signatures. The color, the texture, the way it caught the light. It triggered a memory, a specific type of sedimentary rock found in very particular regions. Regions known for ancient mines, for deposits of rare earth elements, often associated with prehistoric settlements and, consequently, valuable artifacts. This wasn't just foul play. It was intricate. The historian had been dealing with something rare, something sought after. And this dust, clinging to his clothes, was a silent witness. It wasn't native to the grand estate, nor its manicured grounds, nor the surrounding verdant hills. It was a signature from somewhere else entirely, a geological fingerprint that spoke of deep time and distant lands. I thought of the items scattered around him, the pottery fragments. He'd been immersed in his work, in relics. And where did such relics, especially those of significant value, often end up? My internal monologue, a low hum of deduction, led me down a familiar path. And the most visible high-stakes transactions often occurred within specific circles. The kind of item that could only be moved through a specific channel. My mind pictured it, the hushed tension, the glint of spotlights on polished display cases. The kind of place where fortunes changed hands, where history was bought and sold. The mineral dust, the historian's profession, the nature of the injuries. It wasn't a fall, it was murder, and it was tied to something far more valuable than a life. I straightened up, my gaze sweeping the scene once more. The vast hall, the silent body, the distant sounds of the investigative team. The game had changed. And I knew, with a determined resolve, that I was now inextricably part of it. The dried trickle at the historian's temple had been the final detail I'd cataloged before the estate's security detail ushered me out, securing the Great Hall. My mind, however, kept replaying the scene. The unnatural posture, the fixed gaze, and the almost imperceptible dust clinging to the ornate rug beneath the fallen man's head. It was that dust that gnawed at me. Back in my makeshift field lab, set up in one of the manor's smaller, less opulent drawing rooms. I hunched over the microscope. The sample, a minuscule collection of particles I'd carefully scraped from the rug, glowed under the lamp. I adjusted the focus, bringing the fragmented crystals into sharp relief. Their angular structures, their peculiar refractive index, it all screamed specificity. This wasn't ordinary house dust. It certainly wasn't local soil. After cross-referencing against geological databases and spectral analysis, the truth solidified. And then it clicked. I remembered the historian, Dr. Finch, mentioning this very region during a hushed conversation at a conference a few months prior, dismissively labeling it unprofitable. Now, the dust in his hair, embedded in the fibers of the rug, told a different story. He hadn't just visited. He'd been there recently, and likely working. This was the focus of his increasingly secretive research. I packed my equipment with a renewed sense of purpose, the meticulousness of my movements belying the urgency coiling in my gut. The drive was long, winding through forgotten country roads that narrowed to little more than overgrown tracks. The landscape shifted from manicured estate grounds to rugged, untamed wilderness, scarred by ancient landslides and dotted with skeletal trees. The air grew thinner, sharper. When I finally reached the coordinates, the scene was exactly as I'd pictured. Remote, exposed, and raw. A makeshift camp had been hastily abandoned. Tents were collapsed, equipment scattered. Shovels, sieves, archaeological brushes, all coated in the same distinctive mineral dust. A freshly dug trench, deep and irregular, bisected a hillside, exposing layers of stratified earth. It was clear Dr. Finch hadn't been surveying. He'd been digging. The research assistant, I learned from a crumpled invoice I found tucked under a discarded pickaxe handle, was named Kyle. Finch's last known associate, and according to the estate manager, the only person Finch trusted with his recent peculiar expeditions. Kyle had vanished the day Finch died. It took 2 days of relentless tracking, leveraging my limited network of contacts in the academic underworld, to find him. The lead finally came from a disgruntled former colleague of Finch's, who mentioned Kyle had a penchant for collecting rare books and would often frequent specific high-end auction houses. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and polished wood, a stark contrast to the gritty earth of the dig site. Heavy velvet curtains drawn back revealed a cavernous space filled with crates, pedestals, and priceless artifacts awaiting their moment in the spotlight. Kyle, a gaunt figure with nervous eyes and perpetually smudged glasses, was carefully positioning a porcelain vase on a rotating display stand. He flinched when I spoke his name. "Kyle?" I asked, keeping my voice low but firm. "I'm Seth. I need to talk to you about Dr. Finch." He froze, his hand hovering over the vase. His gaze darted around the opulent back room, as if expecting to be overheard. I don't know anything," he stammered, adjusting his glasses. "I haven't seen him in weeks. Our professional association concluded." "The mineral dust on Dr. Finch's body, Kyle," I pressed, stepping closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. "It matches the earth at the dig site, the one you and Dr. Finch were at, just days before he died." Kyle's face paled further, the color draining from his cheeks. His fingers tightened on the delicate vase, knuckles white. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, reflecting the harsh overhead lights. "I told the estate manager everything," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the muffled chatter from the main auction floor. He was obsessed, completely consumed. "Obsessed with what?" I prompted, my tone unwavering. What was so important that he was digging illegally, in a restricted zone, right before his death? He hesitated, licking his dry lips. His eyes darted to a security camera mounted high in the corner of the room, then back to me. The pressure in the room mounted, a silent weight pressing down on him. He was clearly terrified, caught between loyalty, fear, and the undeniable truth of Finch's demise. He called it the lost artifact. Cale finally choked out, his voice a strained whisper. He believed it was the key to an ancient legacy, something powerful. He kept saying it would change everything. And the meetings? I pushed. Who were the enigmatic figures he was meeting? The ones you mentioned to the estate manager who arrived in unmarked cars at strange hours? Kyle visibly recoiled, shaking his head. I never saw their faces. They wore hoods or scarves, always in the dead of night. Finch said they were patrons, demanding. They wanted that artifact, but more afraid of what he'd find or not find at the site. He said they had a network, far-reaching. They promised him unimaginable resources, but demanded absolute secrecy, absolute loyalty. What was this artifact? I asked, my gaze fixed on Kyle, trying to discern truth from fear. He wrung his hands, his eyes wide and unfocused. He never showed it to me. Just drawings, cryptic symbols he found in old texts. He believed it wasn't just an object, but a conduit, a link to something forgotten, something dangerous. And he was getting close. Too close. Kyle swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He told me he had a final meeting scheduled, a handover. Said if anything happened to him, I was to tell them everything. But who them is, I don't know. He pointed a trembling finger at a small, intricately carved wooden box sitting on a nearby display table, meant for an upcoming lot. He left me this. Said it contained instructions if he didn't make it. My eyes narrowed on the box. It was a simple yet elegant piece, out of place among the grandiose auction items. A new thread, a new lead, but one that felt weighted with a palpable sense of peril. Finch had been playing a dangerous game, and it seemed I was now holding his hand. The elegant box, the unsettling sense of a carefully constructed facade. It had all solidified my resolve. Finch, the deceased historian, hadn't just stumbled into a fall. He'd been silenced, and that intricate wooden box was a thread leading directly to the hand that had pulled the trigger. My next step was clear. Back to the estate, specifically the dig site Finch had been so obsessed with. The morning mist still clung to the ancient oak trees as I drove up the winding gravel path to the estate. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The estate, usually bustling with archaeological students during active digs, felt eerily quiet. I parked my vehicle beside a rusted-out utility shed, the silence amplifying the crunch of my boots on the fallen twigs as I approached the designated excavation area. The site itself was a shallow depression in the ground, marked by a haphazard array of tarpaulins and abandoned tools. Finch's last active dig. But something was off. The edges of the trench looked too fresh, some of the overturned earth too recently disturbed. This wasn't the slow, meticulous work of an archaeological team. This was hurried, almost frantic. I knelt, examining the soil. Footprints, not mine, pressed into the damp earth, some clearly made by heavy-soled boots. Not the typical light footwear of a careful field archaeologist. This was recent, within the last day or two. Illicit. My gaze swept over the scattered debris. A broken trowel, a discarded energy drink can, and then, nestled in a clump of freshly turned soil, a small, curved shard. It was no bigger than my thumb, a dull reddish brown, with a faint geometric pattern etched into its surface. I carefully picked it up, my gloved fingers tracing the design. This wasn't Roman, nor even early medieval, which was the expected archaeological yield of this particular estate. The clay, the firing, the stylized pattern, it was distinctly, unequivocally Bronze Age Aegean. An artifact that should not, under any circumstances, have been found here, hundreds of miles from its origin, and millennia out of place within this estate's known history. Finch hadn't just found something. He'd found something impossible, something that rewrote history, or at least challenged the accepted narrative. and someone had been here recently, looking for it, or perhaps for more like it. As I bagged the fragment, the crunch of a different set of tires on the gravel announced an unwelcome arrival. A local detective, a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, emerged from a patrol cruiser, his arms crossed, a clear irritation etched on his face. "Still at it, Seth?" The detective grunted, his voice gruff. "I thought we were done here. The official report is being finalized. Accidental fall, open and shut." I straightened, the small pottery shard a heavy weight in my evidence bag. "With all due respect, Detective, nothing about this case feels open and shut to me. Especially not with what I just found." I held up the bag, letting him glimpse the anachronistic fragment. He merely scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "More old dirt, Seth. Look, I'm under pressure here. High-profile case, prominent family. They want closure. My superiors want closure. The coroner's findings support an accident. You're just stirring up dust." "Dust that tells a story," I countered, my voice firm. "A story that suggests a deliberate act, not a tragic misstep. And now, evidence of clandestine activity at the dig site itself." The detective's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Frustration, perhaps, or a veiled warning. "You need to let this go, Seth. For your own good. There's nothing more to find here." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the disturbed earth, lingering for a moment too long. "Consider this a courtesy call. The department won't be funding any more of your independent investigations." He turned on his heel, his heavy boots kicking up gravel as he returned to his cruiser. His words were a clear message. Back off. But the pottery in my hand and the memory of that ornate box screamed otherwise. I spent another hour meticulously documenting the dig site, taking photographs of the disturbed earth and the fresh boot prints. The detective's warning, rather than deterring me, only sharpened my focus. Someone was very keen on burying this, and not just in the ground. Back in my forensic laboratory, the familiar hum of the ventilation system was a comforting constant. I set the evidence bag containing the pottery fragment under a stereo microscope, eager to begin a preliminary analysis. As I reached for my lab coat, a subtle disarray caught my eye. The heavy oak door to my office, usually secured with a deadbolt, was slightly ajar. My stomach tightened. I pushed the door open slowly, my senses on high alert. Nothing seemed overtly out of place. But then I saw it. The small, decorative wooden box Finch had given me, the one containing his fragmented research notes, was no longer on the corner of my desk where I'd left it. It was on the floor, tipped over, its contents spilling out. This wasn't a random break-in. Nothing else had been touched. My expensive analytical equipment, my collection of rare anthropological texts, all undisturbed. They hadn't wanted my valuables. They had wanted to send a message. A clear, stark warning that someone knew what I was looking for and that they were willing to cross a line to stop me. The game had just become very personal. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked away from the detective's cruiser, the weight of his warning heavy in the air. But the pottery fragment, cool and rough in my palm, felt heavier still. It was a tangible defiance. A small, defiant whisper against the silence of the estate. "Back off," he'd said. But the fragment sang a different tune, a discord in the historical harmony, and I couldn't ignore it. I returned not to the main house, but to the estate's converted carriage house, now my temporary field lab. The space was sparse, utilitarian, a stark contrast to the opulence of the main residence. Under the harsh glare of a portable LED lamp, I placed the fragment on a sterile mat. Its irregular edges, the faint pattern of interlocking geometric shapes, held my gaze. I brought out my field microscope, a compact marvel of optics, and leaned in, my breath held. The initial examination had been cursory, a quick confirmation of its ancient appearance. Now I delved deeper. The clay matrix itself was the first clue. But as I adjusted the magnification, focusing on the minute fissures and pores, a subtle anomaly emerged. The crystalline structure within the clay, the size and distribution of the quartz and feldspar grains didn't quite align with known geological samples from that region. It was close, expertly close, but not identical. Next, the slip, the fine layer of liquid clay applied to the surface before firing. Under the microscope, the ancient slips typically showed a certain unevenness, microscopic air bubbles trapped beneath the surface, a testament to rudimentary application techniques. This fragment slip, however, was unnervingly uniform, almost too perfect. The application was flawless, a precision that hinted at modern methods, not ancient hands. My gaze moved to the painted decoration. The geometric patterns, once seemingly authentic, now appeared too sharp, the lines too consistent. I scraped a tiny sample from the deepest part of a groove, a barely visible speck, and prepared it for a rapid elemental analysis. The results flashed on the small screen of my handheld spectrometer. Trace elements of a specific synthetic pigment, a compound not synthesized until the late 20th century. This wasn't an ancient relic. It was a masterwork of deception, an incredibly sophisticated forgery designed to mimic the pottery of the Bronze Age civilization I'd initially suspected. Finch wasn't just researching forgotten legacies. He was exposing a high-stakes forgery ring. The pieces clicked into place, rearranging the entire puzzle. His tragic fall was no accident. The revelation ignited a fresh urgency within me. If the historian was tracking forgeries, his study wouldn't just hold academic papers, it would hold evidence. I left the carriage house, the detectives warning a distant echo against the roar of new purpose. Back in the sprawling study, the air was still heavy with the scent of aged paper and leather. I scanned the meticulously organized shelves, the stacks of annotated books. Previously, I'd looked for research notes, historical context. I ran my hands along the spines of heavy tomes, tapped on the rich mahogany paneling of the custom-built desk. The detective and his team had been thorough in their initial search for anything obvious, but they wouldn't have been looking for what I was now. My fingers brushed against a section of the desk's ornate carving, a cluster of intertwined oak leaves. One leaf felt subtly different, a fraction of a millimeter looser. I pressed it, and with a faint click, a narrow panel on the desk's side slid inward, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment. Inside, nestled against the velvet lining, were 3 items. A solid-state drive, small and unassuming, clearly encrypted. And finally, a single crisp photograph, slightly faded, showing a grand, opulent room filled with display cases, focused on a specific ornate vase. The caption on the back, handwritten in a precise, elegant script, simply read, "Venice, May 22nd. The vase in the image, though distinct from my fragment, shared the same stylistic markers of the Bronze Age civilization. The encrypted drive, the coded map, they were his final desperate attempt to expose it all. And now, they were mine. The air in the study, once merely quiet, now crackled with a silent, dangerous promise. I was no longer just investigating a death. I was entering a war. The image of the Bronze Age vase, so similar yet subtly distinct from the fragment I'd found, clung to my mind. It was a ghost of a connection, a spectral thread weaving through time, tying Finch's demise to something far grander and more insidious than a simple accident. And I knew just where to start. Crates, some open to reveal the gleam of polished mahogany or the muted shimmer of ancient textiles, lined the walls. A display case, still empty, stood ready for the star lot, presumably the very vase I'd seen in the photograph. I had leveraged an old, unspoken favor, granting me a few hours of undisturbed access to a secluded corner, away from the main floor's controlled chaos. My laptop was open, its screen a cool blue against the warm, oak-paneled walls. Finch's encrypted files, along with the digital scan of the coded map I'd found tucked into his journal, waited. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a familiar dance of algorithms and pattern recognition. Finch, for all his eccentricities, had been meticulous. His encryption wasn't brute force. It was layered, relying on obscure historical ciphers interwoven with modern cryptographic principles. It was a language only a fellow historian or a forensic mind attuned to historical minutiae could hope to decipher. I started with the map, a complex grid of symbols and seemingly random coordinates. My specialized software, usually employed to reconstruct fragmented documents or identify anachronistic textual elements, began to churn through the data. I cross-referenced the symbols with known ancient scripts, comparing their forms and potential phonetic values. Hours blurred into a singular, focused pursuit. The hushed movements of the auction house staff outside my temporary sanctuary faded into an ambient hum. Lines of text, initially gibberish, slowly began to resolve into coherent phrases. The map wasn't just geographical, it was also a timeline, a key to understanding the when as much as the where. Locations flashed across my screen: remote estates, private museums, even a few offshore entities registered in tax havens. These weren't just places. They were nodes in a network, linked by dates that spanned centuries, culminating in transactions recorded within the last decade. My breath hitched as a name. A prominent collector known for his philanthropic endeavors and vast private collection appeared repeatedly. Then another, a scion of an old European banking family. These weren't mere buyers. They were patrons, facilitators, their influence stretching like tendrils across the globe. Next, I turned to the encrypted files, their structure more robust, more fiercely protected. This was Finch's true vault, his most dangerous discoveries. I worked on a hunch, using the partially decrypted map's recurring symbols as potential keys. The first few layers peeled back like ancient parchment, revealing fragments of correspondence, ledger entries, and historical essays. The language was academic, almost scholarly, yet beneath the veneer of erudition lay a chilling undercurrent. Terms began to emerge. The legacy, whispered in hushed digital tones, and the keepers, a collective referring to themselves as stewards of a greater truth. My internal monologue shifted from analytical to a growing dread. These weren't just wealthy collectors funding a black market. These files spoke of something far more profound, a deliberate, systematic effort. They detailed not just the acquisition of artifacts, but their placement, their recontextualization within sanctioned narratives. There were mentions of correcting historical inaccuracies, of preserving the true lineage. It wasn't about forgery. It was about manipulating genuine history. A particularly dense section of text finally yielded to my decryption efforts. It was a manifesto of sorts, penned in archaic prose. It spoke of a sacred duty to safeguard certain truths, to guide the course of historical understanding, and to protect specific ancient bloodlines. The very phrase sent a shiver down my spine. From dilution or discovery. The artifacts weren't just commodities. They were tools, instruments of control. They were being used to substantiate a revised past, a version of history sculpted by the keepers to serve the legacy. The tension in the back room, previously external, now coiled tightly within me. A group so powerful, so deeply entrenched, that they could rewrite history itself, controlling not just priceless artifacts, but the very narrative of human civilization. The fall, the fragment, the anachronistic details. They weren't just clues to a murder. They were breadcrumbs leading to an organization capable of silencing anyone who threatened their carefully constructed reality. I had found what Finch had died for, and the knowledge was a heavy, perilous weight. Polished mahogany tables gleamed under discreet spotlights, laden with ancient pottery, faded tapestries, and cases of jewels that whispered of forgotten empires. Every surface felt charged, anticipating the hammer's fall, the shift of ownership, the culmination of discreet negotiations. I moved through the controlled chaos, a forensic outsider in a world of connoisseurs, my gaze less on the glittering displays and more on the faces, searching. I found the retired curator tucked away in a dimly lit corner, scrutinizing a collection of Roman coinage with a jeweler's loupe. His profile, framed by wisps of white hair, was familiar from old conference photos. A mentor to Finch, a respected authority in his field. He looked frail, his shoulders stooped, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that belied his age. "Professor," I began, my voice low, cutting through the hushed murmurs of the room. He startled, dropping the loupe onto the velvet display. It made a surprisingly loud clatter. He squinted at me, his brow furrowed. "Do I know you?" "Seth?" I introduced myself, extending a hand. "I'm the anthropologist working on Doctor." He didn't take my hand. "Finch. A tragedy. Such a brilliant mind." His voice was raspy, laced with a weariness that went beyond grief. "Indeed," I pressed, keeping my tone level. "And I believe it was no accident." His gaze darted around the back room, as if fearful of eavesdroppers amidst the quiet bustle. "You shouldn't be here, young man. This is hardly the place for such discussions." "Perhaps not," I conceded. "But you were a close colleague of Finch's. You know his work, his passions. He was obsessed with a particular Bronze Age culture, wasn't he? And not just the public-facing aspects." The curator's jaw tightened. He picked up the loupe, turning it over and over in his trembling fingers. Finch had many passions. A curious mind. He chased shadows sometimes. Shadows that led to his death, I suspect, I stated, watching him closely. He was researching something called the Keepers, wasn't he? A secret society controlling significant archaeological finds? The curator flinched, a visible shudder passing through him. His eyes, usually sharp, now held a haunted quality. He finally met my gaze, a plea for understanding in their depths. "You don't know what you're dabbling in, Seth. These are powerful people. They operate outside the usual channels. They have been doing so for centuries." Finch thought they were trading in artifacts, using them for political and financial leverage. I pushed, recalling my notes from his study. He believed they were rewriting history, controlling narratives through the selective release or suppression of ancient discoveries. The curator let out a ragged sigh, a sound of defeat. Finch was a man of integrity. He saw the corruption, the manipulation. A network, deeply entrenched, with roots in some of the oldest families, the wealthiest institutions. This was more than just illicit trade. It was intellectual subjugation. "And the mineral dust?" I asked, shifting gears, bringing up the forensic evidence. The unique composition I found on Finch's clothing, on the vase fragment. It's distinctive. Almost crystalline. Do you recognize it? He closed his eyes, a pained expression on his face. When he opened them, the fear was more pronounced. Finch mentioned it once. Years ago. A site in the Scottish Highlands. Remote. Untouched. He spoke of a unique geological formation. A vein of mineral that created a distinct, almost shimmering dust when disturbed. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The curator nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on some distant, unsettling memory. "Yes, the Blackwood estate. It's been in the same family for generations, known for its desolate beauty, its isolation, and its rumored hidden ancient sites. The family has always been fiercely protective of its land, especially of any historical finds. They claimed it was to preserve the integrity of the past, but Finch suspected they were merely guarding their secrets. Blackwood Estate. A remote, historically significant estate. The unique mineral dust, now linked to a specific private estate. It was all aligning, too perfectly. The conspiracy wasn't just about artifacts. It was about the very ground they lay beneath, about the legacy of those who controlled it. The curator leaned closer, his voice barely audible. Finch was convinced the keepers had a stronghold there. a central hub for their operations. He believed they weren't just trading artifacts, but manufacturing a history, a narrative, from the ground up to preserve their own power. He was getting too close. My meticulous examination hadn't just uncovered foul play. It had unearthed a clandestine network, a secret society whose machinations extended far beyond a simple illicit trade. They were rewriting the past to control the future, and Finch had paid the ultimate price for trying to expose them. I had to go to Blackwood. The answer and the danger lay there. I moved with a practiced nonchalance, my eyes scanning the array of items awaiting their moment on the block. The previous night's revelation, that Blackwood, the seemingly benign antiquities dealer, was intertwined with the illicit trade of artifacts. Perhaps even the anachronistic fragments I'd found had sharpened my senses to a razor's edge. My colleague's relentless pursuit of truth had pointed to a single dangerous trajectory, and I was now following it directly into the heart of the beast. My gaze settled on a small display case, not part of the main auction, but a private viewing. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a bronze dagger. Its hilt was intricately worked, and the blade, though ancient, held an unsettling gleam. It wasn't the dagger itself that snagged my attention, but a barely perceptible film of dust adhering to the hilt, almost identical in composition to the particulates I'd meticulously extracted from the historian's remains. It was a signature, a whispered confirmation. This dagger, or one like it, had been in proximity to the same illicit operation. I observed the industrialist, Elias Thorne, a man whose reputation for acquiring rare antiquities was as vast as his fortune, speaking in hushed tones with the auctioneer. He wasn't just a collector, he was a gatekeeper, and the dagger was a key. My internal compass swung violently, pointing away from the public spectacle and towards the private, hidden world Thorne inhabited. The decision was swift, born of urgency and a grim determination. The auction house was a distraction, a facade. The true answers lay elsewhere. I slipped out, blending with the stream of well-heeled patrons, my mind already mapping out the approach to Thorne's remote private estate. It was a sprawling fortress, nestled deep within a heavily forested valley, rumored to house an unparalleled collection of artifacts. And perhaps a secret far more sinister. The drive was long, the paved roads giving way to gravel, then to a barely maintained track that wound through dense woodland. Dusk bled into a starless night by the time I reached the estate's outer perimeter. High walls, topped with razor wire, were barely visible behind a thick screen of mature trees. Infrared cameras blinked like predatory eyes from strategically placed poles. This wasn't just a home, it was a stronghold. I parked my rented vehicle a considerable distance away, camouflaged it beneath a thick canopy, and proceeded on foot. The air grew colder, carrying the damp scent of pine needles and decaying leaves. My bag, packed with a minimal kit, lockpicks, a compact borescope, a UV flashlight, and a small, high-resolution camera, felt heavy, each item a silent promise of trespass. Navigating the perimeter took time, a patient dance with motion sensors and pressure plates I couldn't see but could infer from the subtle shifts in the landscape and the faint hum of power lines. My forensic training wasn't just about the dead. It was about understanding systems, patterns, and vulnerabilities. I found a blind spot, a small section where an ancient oak had grown too close to the wall, partially obscuring a camera's field of view. A quick, silent climb, a careful drop to the other side, and I was in. The estate grounds were manicured but eerily silent. No guard dogs barked, no floodlights swept the lawn. The true security, I suspected, lay in its sophistication and its remoteness. My fingers, guided by instinct and years of studying intricate mechanisms, worked with a delicate precision. The air inside was cool, dry, and smelled faintly of plaster, solvents, and aged metal. My UV flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a state-of-the-art forgery workshop. Workbenches lined the walls, laden with specialized tools. Micro-chisels, precision drills, pigment grinders, and a bewildering array of materials. Ancient clay, volcanic ash, crushed lapis lazuli, even synthetic resins designed to mimic natural patina. Half-finished objects lay under dust covers. A miniature sarcophagus, a Roman coin, and, most damningly, a partially reconstructed Bronze Age vase, its surface bearing the familiar, anachronistic dust. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about collecting. It was about manufacturing a legacy, a false history. The fragments I'd found on the historian, the Bronze Age vase that had been the catalyst for this investigation. It all traced back here. My gaze swept the room, searching for a deeper secret. The workshop felt like a prologue. I noticed a section of the wall behind a large industrial kiln that seemed slightly off. The plasterwork was newer, too perfect. I tapped it gently. Pressing against the seam, I felt a subtle give. My fingers traced the outline, searching for a release. It was a pressure plate, disguised as a decorative relief. My heart hammered against my ribs, a percussive beat against the pervasive quiet. The passage led to a deeper chamber, a hidden vault. My UV light danced over rows of climate-controlled display cases and archival shelves. Inside, bathed in the eerie glow, was an astonishing sight. A trove of genuine, priceless artifacts, clearly stolen from legitimate archaeological sites. Sumerian cuneiform tablets, Egyptian funerary masks, pre-Columbian gold figurines, and an entire collection of Mycenaean pottery, far more exquisite than anything displayed in the auction house. My camera flashed silently, capturing image after image, each click a piece of the puzzle falling into place. The sheer audacity of it, the scale of the operation, made my stomach churn. The historian hadn't just stumbled upon a minor irregularity. He had unearthed an empire of stolen heritage and paid the ultimate price. A high-pitched electronic whine that echoed off the ancient walls. Red indicator lights flashed, bathing the vault in an infernal glow. Thorne's advanced security systems had detected my presence. My blood turned to ice, then burned with a desperate heat. The sliding wall was already retracting, sealing me in. I lunged, throwing my shoulder against the closing gap, squeezing through just as the heavy panel slammed shut with a final, echoing thud. Footsteps pounded above, distant but growing closer. I burst back into the workshop, adrenaline flooding my veins. The exit, the oak door, seemed miles away. A piercing strobe light activated, disorienting me. I ducked, scrambling over a workbench, knocking over a tray of chisels with a metallic clatter. The alarm intensified, a relentless shriek. Intruder detected in Sector Gamma. A synthesized voice boomed from hidden speakers. I could hear the distinct thump-thump-thump of heavy boots on the floor above, converging. My escape had to be as silent and swift as my entry. I knew the layout of the grounds now, the blind spots, the paths. It wouldn't be easy, but I had the evidence, and that was all that mattered. I sprinted towards the oak door, the wail of the alarm chasing me, a terrifying symphony of detection and pursuit. The previous night's revelation that Blackwood, the seemingly benevolent proprietor of this very establishment, was deeply entangled in the Keeper's conspiracy had solidified my purpose. I wasn't here to admire art. I was here to finish what I started, under the very nose of the man I now knew was a dangerous adversary. My tablet, disguised within a worn leather portfolio, glowed faintly beneath my hand. The backroom was a chaotic symphony of hushed voices, the rustle of protective wrapping, and the occasional clink of pottery. Shadows stretched long and distorted under the utilitarian strip lighting, providing just enough cover for my clandestine review. I'd found a relatively secluded nook between a towering crated statue and a stack of antique tapestries, the musty scent of ancient wool doing little to mask the tension coiling in my gut. My fingers, usually steady, trembled slightly as I navigated through the compiled evidence. Every photograph, every detailed scan, every microscopic trace I'd painstakingly collected from Thorne's estate, from Finch's last known location, from the periphery of the illicit artifact trade, coalesced on that screen. I had to connect Thorne directly to Finch's murder and, by extension, to the Keepers. The clock was ticking, not just until the auction began, but until my window of opportunity closed, or worse, until they realized how close I was. The first set of images scrolled past, high-resolution shots of the library floor where Thorne had supposedly fallen. My initial examination had noted the unusual scuff marks, too precise for a mere stumble. Now, zoomed in and cross-referenced with the dimensions of the ancient dagger I'd recovered, the pattern was unmistakable. The specific, almost archaic method of blade forging left a unique microscopic residue. I had found traces of that same residue embedded in the wood grain, a phantom imprint of a struggle, a deliberate act of violence, not an accident. Thorne hadn't fallen on the dagger. He had wielded it. Next, I pulled up the forensic scans of Thorne's clothing. A single, almost invisible fiber, not from his wardrobe, nor from the estate's furnishings, but from a coarse, ancient linen. I'd cross-referenced it against samples from known artifact shrouds, those used to protect relics smuggled from archaeological sites. The match was chillingly precise. This fiber, transferred during a struggle, placed Thorne in direct contact with Finch, or at least with the illicit trade that led to Finch's demise. My gaze flickered across the backroom. A burly security guard, his eyes scanning the packed crates, paused near my hiding spot. I feigned interest in a nearby bronze bust, my heart thrumming against my ribs. He moved on, oblivious, but the close call sharpened my focus. They were everywhere. The Keepers were ingrained, powerful. I brought up the satellite imagery of Thorne's estate, cross-referenced with Finch's movements in the days leading up to his disappearance. The anomalies jumped out. A delivery truck, unmarked, making a late-night call to Thorne's estate the evening before Finch's body was found. The truck's route, traced through traffic cameras, led directly to a known Keeper waypoint, an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, a place I recognized from my earlier investigations into stolen antiquities. The timing was too perfect, the connection too strong. Thorne wasn't just a historian. He was an active participant in their network, orchestrating the illicit movement of artifacts and silencing those who got too close. Finch, it became clear, had been one of those inconvenient witnesses. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The anachronistic details. This preservative, which I detected during my initial examination of Thorne, was the same type found on the smuggled artifacts Thorne was handling. Artifacts that Finch had likely been trying to expose. It wasn't just circumstantial. It was a mosaic of irrefutable facts. Thorne had not only been involved in the Keepers' conspiracy, moving their illicit goods, but he had also directly murdered Finch, silencing him with the very tools of their trade. The fall was a staged cover-up, poorly executed for a forensic eye like mine. My hands were steady now, the tremor replaced by a surge of grim resolve. I had it. The complete, unassailable forensic case. Enough to bring down Thorne, Blackwood, and potentially dismantle the Keepers' network. But I also knew the police force was compromised. Presenting this to the wrong officer would be a death sentence, not just for the case, but for me. I needed to move fast, surgically, and trust no one outside my immediate, carefully vetted circle. The murmur of the crowd outside the backroom grew louder, signaling the imminent start of the auction. My life, I knew, hung by a thread. But the truth, meticulously pieced together on this small screen, was a powerful shield. I closed the portfolio, the glow of the tablet extinguished, and stood, ready to face the storm. The game was no longer about evidence collection. It was about survival. The previous night's revelation that Blackwood, the seemingly benign antiquarian, was a key facilitator for Thorne's illicit trade, had sharpened my focus, honing it to a razor's edge. Every gilded frame, every velvet-draped pedestal now felt like a potential stage for a confession or a battlefield. My gaze settled on Lot 117, a collection of Roman-era scrolls, meticulously preserved, displayed under a low-wattage spotlight. It was the centerpiece, the one Thorne himself had supposedly discovered in a remote dig. The curator had gushed about its provenance, its undeniable authenticity, but I knew better. I'd seen the subtle, almost invisible telltales before. I reached into my inner jacket pocket, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the microspectrometer. My plan was audacious, perhaps reckless, but it was the only way to expose Thorne publicly, to dismantle his network, the Keepers, for good. Justice for Dr. Finch demanded it. Quite magnificent, wouldn't you agree, Seth? The voice was smooth, a silken cord woven with condescension. Thorne. I didn't turn, my eyes still fixed on the scrolls, but my grip on the spectrometer tightened imperceptibly. Magnificent, certainly. But sometimes, magnificent things hide magnificent deceptions. He stepped beside me, his tailored suit a dark blur in my peripheral vision. The air grew heavy, charged with unspoken animosity. A cynic as always. Or perhaps a jealous rival for the spotlight? His tone was light, but I felt the weight of his scrutiny. Neither. Just a scientist who values truth above all else. I finally turned, meeting his gaze. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, held a flicker of something new. A predatory anticipation. He knew I was close. He just didn't know how close. Truth, Thorne scoffed, a thin smile playing on his lips. A malleable concept in the right hands. Or the wrong ones. Like the truth about Dr. Finch's death? I watched him closely. His smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Or the truth about these scrolls. I gestured towards Lot 117. Before he could respond, I saw my opportunity. A group of potential buyers, along with a prominent art critic and a representative from the National Heritage Foundation, were approaching, drawn by the allure of the scrolls. I moved swiftly, a calculated risk. I pulled the spectrometer from my pocket. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the hushed murmurs of the backroom. Heads turned. Thorne's eyes narrowed, a flash of pure venom. As a forensic anthropologist, I find myself uniquely positioned to comment on the authenticity of certain items. I held up the device. This little piece of equipment, often used to analyze minute bone fragments, can also detect specific mineral compositions, even those hidden beneath centuries of patina. The art critic, a woman with a keen, skeptical gaze, raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly are you implying, Professor?" "I'm implying," I stated, my voice gaining strength, "that the soil residue found on Dr. Finch's remains, a unique blend of volcanic ash and ancient alluvial deposits, precisely matched samples I took from the Blackwood estate. A blend that, until recently, was thought to be exclusive to a very specific, undocumented archaeological site." Thorne took a step forward, his composure cracking. "This is outrageous, a baseless accusation." "Is it?" I ignored him, focusing on the scrolls. Dr. Finch was investigating a series of anomalies in the provenance of several artifacts linked to Thorne. He believed they were sourced from this very undocumented site, a site Thorne and his keepers have been plundering for years. I leaned closer to the scrolls, pressing the spectrometer's sensor to a minute. Almost invisible imperfection on one of the parchment's edges. The device whirred softly, its digital display flickering. A hush fell over the back room. The heritage representative frowned, her arms crossed. Finch's fingernails. Particles that could only have come from a specific type of ancient tool, used to excavate delicate materials without damaging them. Tools that, coincidentally, were found at the undocumented site Dr. Finch was investigating. The spectrometer beeped, confirming a match. The display glowed green. "And here it is," I announced, holding the device aloft for everyone to see. Traces of that very same iron oxide embedded in the binding of this ancient scroll. A binding that, upon closer inspection, also contains synthetic polymers. A modern adhesive used to repair damage from careless extraction, damage that couldn't possibly be centuries old. Thorn lunged. It was a sudden, desperate move, fueled by rage and panic. He aimed for the spectrometer, but I anticipated it. I sidestepped, my forensic training allowing me to react with surprising speed. He stumbled, colliding with a display pedestal, sending a priceless Ming vase tottering precariously. "Security!" Thorn roared, regaining his balance, his face a mask of furious desperation. "Remove this madman!" But the damage was done. The heritage representative was already pulling out her phone. The art critic stared at Thorn, her skepticism now replaced by dawning horror. "The keepers," I articulated, my voice ringing out, "are not conservators of history, but its destroyers. They fabricate provenance, they plunder, and they silence anyone who gets too close to their illicit trade. Doctor, he found the truth you tried to bury." Thorn, realizing his public image was crumbling around him, abandoned all pretense. He shoved past the now alert security guards who were just beginning to react, making a break for a service exit at the far end of the back room. "He's escaping!" I yelled, pushing past a bewildered assistant, my own adrenaline surging. I couldn't let him disappear. Not now. Not after everything. The chase was on. I knew the backroom's layout from my initial survey cramped, filled with crates and canvases, a labyrinth designed for efficient movement of goods, not for a foot pursuit. But I also knew Thorn's arrogance would lead him to underestimate my resolve. He'd never considered a forensic anthropologist could be a threat beyond a courtroom. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. He was fast, surprisingly agile for his age, but the security guards, leaner and younger, were already on his heels. I watched them disappear into the maze of loading docks and narrow alleys, the cacophony of the auction floor momentarily forgotten. The lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, barked orders into a small radio, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the remaining staff. Other security personnel moved quickly, securing the precious illicit cargo that had just been on display. My own heart, which had been a frantic drum against my ribs, slowly began to find a more measured rhythm. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the stale, metallic scent of the auction house back room filling my lungs. The artifacts, now carefully wrapped and labeled, were being loaded onto secure carts. They were no longer symbols of a hidden conspiracy, but evidence, tangible proof of a truth unearthed. Minutes later, a flurry of activity at the service entrance signaled the end of the chase. Thorn was brought back, flanked by 2 guards, his expensive suit disheveled, a smear of grease on his cheek. He said nothing, offering no resistance as the lead investigator read him his rights, her voice calm and authoritative. I felt no triumph, only a profound weariness. The physical pursuit was over, but the psychological aftermath was just beginning. Forensic teams, summoned with urgency, began their meticulous work. I provided my statement to a diligent reporting officer, detailing my observations, the anachronistic details, the coded messages, the ancient marks that connected the artifacts to the historian's death and the deeper conspiracy. Each word felt heavy, each detail a piece of a monstrous puzzle finally completed. Over the next few days, the full extent of the operation unraveled with terrifying speed. The illicit trade, fueled by a network of corrupt academics, wealthy patrons, and ruthless operatives, was exposed to the world. News channels broadcasted images of Thorn being led away, his face plastered across every screen. The public outcry was immediate and visceral. The historian's death, once deemed an accident, was now understood as a desperate act of silencing, a tragic consequence of uncovering too much. I found myself in a quiet room, far from the media frenzy, examining photographs of the recovered items. The obsidian tablet in particular held my gaze. Its surface, once a cryptic map to a hidden legacy, was now a testament to the power of truth. The symbols, which I had painstakingly deciphered, spoke of rituals and beliefs long thought extinct, passed down through generations of the Keepers. This wasn't just about stolen relics. It was about the deliberate suppression and distortion of human history, a profound violation of the past itself. The psychological toll was immense. The faces of the historian and the anonymous victims whose remains I had examined flashed in my mind. They were finally at peace, their stories told, their justice served. But the cost, the emotional cost of bearing witness to such depravity, was a burden I knew I would carry forever. I stood by a window overlooking the city, the relentless pulse of life continuing below, oblivious to the ancient secrets that had just been dragged into the light. But this case had been different. It had shown me the fragile boundary between scholarship and obsession, between preservation and perversion. The world of forensic investigation suddenly felt vast, dangerous, and more compelling than ever before. There were other secrets, other forgotten legacies waiting to be uncovered, other truths to be wrestled from the clutches of those who would bury them. My meticulous methods, my unwavering commitment to the smallest detail, had proven their worth. Perhaps, I mused, this was not an end, but a beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but my resolve, forged in the crucible of this extraordinary case, was unshakable.